If I may ask, do you remember Nintendo's digital event for E3 2014? If I recall correctly, this would be the first E3 I personally watched and one of the first Nintendo Directs I remember. It's quite difficult to forget this event, seeing as it was the one where Nintendo would collaborate with Robot Chicken while Smash Mother 3, Shaft spectacularly animated the reveal trailer for Polity in a Dark Pit, and the numerous first looks at upcoming Nintendo titles such as The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Splatoon. Honestly, with the slow start to both the Wii U and 3DS, an event like this was surely appreciated. This breathtaking showcase was also the same event where Nintendo would unveil their Toys to Life amiibo that would release alongside the new Super Smash Bros. For Wii U in that upcoming year. Yes, amiibo. To compete against Skylanders and Disney Infinity at the time, described as figures of characters from a variety of Nintendo series that would, quote, come to life in your games in many different ways, amiibo was Nintendo's answer to the craze that was toys with NFC compatibility. This is if we, ignore Pokemon Rumble U's attempt. Unlike the aforementioned series where either the games required one to purchase figures to play and progress, the functionality of Amiibo is left ambiguous despite the immediate preview of their compatibility within Super Smash Bros. For Wii U. All that fans could speculate from the trailer provided was that games relating to series such as Metroid, Pokemon, Animal Crossing, and Kirby would implement functionality in the future. Though, it would only be fair to mention that to no one's surprise, upcoming releases within the Mario franchise would receive future Amiibo support. Interestingly enough, Lucina from the recent Fire Emblem Awakening, released on Nintendo 3DS, was among that collage of characters depicted alongside the Wii U gamepad. Was this a hint towards Amiibo support being added to Fire Emblem Awakening through an update, or a possible port of Awakening to the Wii U that would include Amiibo functionality? Sadly, the answer to both of these ideas are no, and it would take more than a year for Fire Emblem fans to truly get a glimpse of what Fire Emblem and Amiibo would offer. Today, we'll be taking an extensive look at the history of Fire Emblem related Amiibo and the compatibility these figurines would provide to Nintendo titles alongside Intelligent Systems' own works. However, I need to point out that general functionality, such as Marth providing Kirby the sword ability and Kirby Planet Robobot, will not be looked into. Instead, I'd like to highlight the more specific and interesting uses these amiibo provided to the game they were to come to life into, unless it is a Fire Emblem game, which will be discussed regardless of the inclusion. Lastly, to give credit where credit is due, a lot of the initial information on what games and general amiibo compatibility they offered came from Amiibo Life, the unofficial amiibo database. If you want to find out more about amiibo figures and cards you may not have known about, I wholeheartedly recommend the site. Now, with all this said, grab your honey caramel banana chocolate donut available at your local Hiho Mart, and let's dive into the history of amiibo compatibility for Fire Emblem characters. No surprises here, but staying true to the Amiibo trailer, Super Smash Bros. For Wii U was the first title to feature Amiibo support if you don't include games like Mario Kart 8 that had its 3.0.0 update a week prior to include Amiibo functionality for costumes. I don't believe I have to mention too much about this game, but to provide a quick refresher, Super Smash Bros. For Wii U is the 5th entry in Nintendo's all-star Bump and Bruising Brawl and Bash series where one could settle it in Smash through one of the best 1 to 8 player action platform fighters. The game is pretty similar to its predecessors, where you could play alone or play with friends in a variety of modes with an over-the-top roster consisting of many first and third-party characters from the likes of Mario, Link, Ryu, and Cloud. Although being the least commercially successful in the series, falling 4 million short than its 3DS counterpart, Super Smash Bros. For Wii U can still be fondly remembered as the first HD entry in the series, and for Mega Man! Mega Man! The Super Fighting Robot! With that, its release on November 21st, 2014 in North America would usher in Wave 1 of the Super Smash Bros. Lineup and feature the beloved Lodestar, Marth from Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon, and the Blade of Light among the first 12 amiibo released in North America. I want to emphasize 12 because when researching for this video, I learned that Japan's first wave of amiibo would instead have 18 fighters, some of which would be included in North America's Wave 2. And because of that, going forth, I will predominantly be mentioning North American release dates. In this title, and first demonstration of amiibo compatibility for Nintendo games, one can train their amiibo to level 50 as it learns the opponent's playing style. You could feed it equipment and change its special moves to your own liking to then face or team up in offline Smash modes. Since Nintendo promised to release an amiibo for each Smash fighter, including DLC once they're unveiled, Fire Emblem fans could rest assured knowing that Ike, Lucina, Robin, Roy, and Corrin were to get their own amiibo in certain waves as those continue to release throughout Super Smash Bros. For Wii U and 3DS's lifespan. To provide information, Ike's amiibo, who was actually first hinted at in the 50 Fact Extravaganza video under the nickname Dunker, would release in Wave 3 on February 28, 2015 as a non-store exclusive. As a fun fact of sorts, when Amazon Mexico opened physical pre-orders for the first time in 2015, the first product sold was an Ike amiibo with Expansión Económica tweeting, "Como dato curioso, el primer producto que se vendió en Amazon México fue un amiibo de Ike para Wii U." Just a wave later, both Lucina and Robin had a non-store exclusive release on May 29, 2015. And finally, with DLC fighters being lower priority compared to the base roster that was still releasing, it would be almost a year later until Roy released in Wave 9 as a GameStop exclusive on March 18, 2016, and another year where Corrin and Corrin Player 2 released as a part of Wave 10 on July 21, 2017, with the Player 2 amiibo being an Amazon exclusive. Personally, I wouldn't get into the Fire Emblem series as a fan until June 2015 after playing the Fire Emblem Awakening demo from the 3DS eShop despite loving the Fire Emblem theme's inclusion back in Super Smash Bros. Melee. That said, I would pick up Lucina and Robin's amiibo at an EV Games a couple months later after their release in anticipation for Fire Emblem Fates and because the two characters became my main shortly after purchasing and completing Awakening. Overall, when I look back on this, I believe Super Smash Bros. For Wii U's amiibo functionality was a fair first attempt in implementing Nintendo's Toys to Life within a game where the remaining 99% could be played without an amiibo. I think it appealed to both demographics of children and adults, as the former could customize and play alongside their favorite characters, while the latter could collect and display their favorite Nintendo and third-party reps if they didn't want to train the figurine. The implementation of amiibo didn't need to be revolutionary and game-changing in its first endeavor, and at worst, they were still a nice little collectible to purchase even if you didn't own a Wii U and /or only had the 3DS version at the time. Lastly, since we're on the topic of the 3DS version, everything mentioned so far can be applied to Super Smash Bros. For 3DS with the release of the new Nintendo 3DS, 3DS XL, and the 1.0.5 update on February 9, 2015 that would enable one to train their amiibo fighter on the go. Eventually, base 3DS small owners too would be able to get on the action when Roy joined the fray as a DLC fighter with the 1.0.8 update adding future support for the NFC writer/reader on June 14, 2015. Honestly, it would have been cool to face your already broken amiibo fighters in a game mode like Smash Run instead of CPUs, assuming you couldn't do local play with your friends or family. But what can you do? Once again, I still believe it was an alright beginning for amiibo as both a Toys to Life figure and collectible to display. Okay, when I said Super Smash Bros. For Wii U was the first title to feature amiibo support, I'm technically right but somewhat wrong. This game, One Piece Super Grandero Battle Exu, or One Piece Super Grand Battle X, released exclusively in Japan on November 13, 2014, a week prior to the North American release of Super Smash Bros. For Wii U, would feature amiibo support that added special costumes based on some of the characters within the first wave of the Super Smash Bros. Lineup. Have you ever wanted to see Luffy in a Mario Luigi costume, or Robin in a Samus outfit? Well, Fire Emblem fans could use the Marth amiibo to unlock a costume specifically for Brook that allows them to don the Lodestar's Super Smash Bros. For Wii U and 3DS inspired outfit alongside Fulchin. Now, I'm gonna be honest, I know relatively nothing about One Piece, nor do I plan to pretend like I know anything more about the series other than the fact that it has over 1,000 episodes for its anime, but I find the attention to detail for these costumes quite amazing. Do they match the character they're representing? I'm not entirely sure, and that's for you One Piece fans to decide, but I do like the attempt to implement some Nintendo charm into another fighting game. Nevertheless, to return to the previous point of technicality, from what I could research based on articles, unlisted videos by both Bandai Namco and Nintendo, and other public videos floating around, it appears that amiibo support for this 3DS title was first mentioned in a Jump magazine for December 2014 that showcased some of the amiibo costumes alongside art and screenshots. All in all, despite the conflicting information, the lack of proper documentation, and the fact that both the game and the new Nintendo 3DS were already released in Japan prior to the release of Super Smash Bros. For Wii U in North America, amiibo would not release in Japan until December 6, 2014 to coincide with its region's Super Smash Bros. For Wii U launch. So, on a technicality, since Super Smash Bros. For Wii U was already out in North America, and this game never was localized or released in the West, it stands to reason that this was the second title in the amiibo history timeline to feature unique Fire Emblem support. Other than these costumes and fun little speculation, the costumes are in fact the only content these amiibo provided for the game. Although this somewhat breaks the rule implemented at the start of the video, nor is this title a Fire Emblem game, I wanted to give it an exception, as it was one of the first third-party titles to implement amiibo support, and for Fire Emblem Amiibo 2 whilst providing a unique incentive to purchase other amiibo if you are a fan of Nintendo characters and One Piece. Truth be told, costumes and accessories as a form of amiibo content, which we'll see again in future titles such as Bayonetta 2 and Yoshi's Woolly World, is one of my favorite ways to incorporate amiibo into games without locking too much away from the player. In the end, it's fun to see other video game characters take on the appearance of Nintendo favorites in one way or another. Bet you forgot this game existed, huh? Well, codename S.T.E.A.M is somewhat the game I alluded to at the start of the video, in which Fire Emblem fans would truly see the limits of amiibo support in future Nintendo games. In this turn-based strategy game released in North America on March 13, 2015, players would experience a third-person over-the-shoulder gameplay style reminiscent of both Fire Emblem and Sega's Valkyria Chronicles. The premise of this game is one where Strike Team eliminating the alien menace, otherwise known as S.T.E.A.M, must fight against aliens in an alternate reality set within steampunk London. Personally, my experience amounts to watching Nintendo Treehouse at E3 and playing the demo from the eShop years ago, which is basically nothing. But one quick glance on the Wikipedia article shows that I'm missing out when you get to save Queen Victoria with the help of the Cowardly Lion from the Wizard of Oz? What the f? Anyways, to get back on track, in this game, players could tap either the Marth, Ike, Lucina, or Robin amiibo to use the character as a party member of S.T.E.A.M, provided with their own steampunk-inspired designs, accompanying unique music such as Showdown, which you're currently listening to, and their own weapons and skills. These Fire Emblem characters function almost the same to other members of S.T.E.A.M to an impressive result. Basically, you couldn't swap out the weapons, and if the unit died, you couldn't revive them at a checkpoint and had to wait a bit longer to bring them back. For an often forgotten game in Nintendo's history, which does make sense when looking at the poor sales of its first week in Japan and mixed critic and user scores on review sites, codename S.T.E.A.M has one of the best implemented amiibo functions in the history of amiibo-compatible games in my opinion. Whether you care about either series or not, the fact that Fire Emblem characters were implemented into this unrelated title at all with proper and useful functionality is a feat in itself when you think about the countless titles where its amiibo support amounts to getting random in-game currency or items. Now, is this foreshadowing? Who knows? Nonetheless, I really have to play this game one day, and I'm also on the firm belief that the amiibo support featured in this game would act as the testing grounds for the more impressive use of Fire Emblem amiibo within Fire Emblem Fates that we'll speak about later. If none of that was impressive already, let me end this off with a fun fact saying that this was the first video game that featured Prince Marth's current English voice actor of Yuri Lowenthal, who you may know as Makoto or Yosuke from the Persona series, or Peter Parker from Marvel's Spider-Man. Yes, contrary to popular belief, Fire Emblem Fates was not the first video game to feature Yuri as the English voice for Marth, as that would release in the West a year later. Surprising that a non-related Fire Emblem game would be the first to do this, isn't it? Though, I stress video game, as we had the Fire Emblem OVA that released around the time of Fire Emblem Mystery of the New Emblem in Japan, which also had an official English dub. Might want to put that one on the back burner. Who knows? Whether you know this game as Yoshi's Woolly World or Poochie and Yoshi's Woolly World, we'll be counting the original Wii U version as fourth in the Fire Emblem amiibo timeline, released in the West on October 16th, 2015. First revealed in that same E3 2014 digital event, Yoshi's Woolly World acts as a spiritual successor to one of my favorite games of all time, Kirby's Epic Yarn. This highly praised title focuses on Yarn Yoshis rescuing the day against Kamek and Baby Bowser in an art style that seems like a natural evolution from previous entries of Color and Book and Pop-Up Storybook. As previously mentioned, This title utilizes one of my favorite amiibo functionalities of costumes galore, with its clever use of making the Yarn Yoshi's pattern take on the appearance of the many Super Smash Bros., Splatoon, and Animal Crossing amiibo. It's so cute and adorable how you can customize Yoshi to have a fun little mustache with the Mario amiibo, or have stubby boxing gloves by using a Little Mac amiibo. Honestly, I could go on and on about how amazing the designs for Yarn Yoshi as an Inkling Girl, Waddle Dee, Sonic the Hedgehog, and countless others are, but we'd be stuck here all day. In relation to Fire Emblem, the Wii U version of Yoshi's Woolly World would enable support for Marth, Ike, Robin, and Lucina's amiibo. For any amiibo that were incompatible with the title, which basically amounted to amiibo that released after the game, the Yarn Yoshi would gain a pattern that featured the amiibo logo on a white shirt. Unfortunately, much to the dismay of Fire Emblem fans, this meant that amiibo such as Royer Corn wouldn't get their own patterns, would have to accept the cold reality of amiibo shirt Yarn Yoshi. However, this cold reality would soon thaw itself, as all of this would change roughly 2 years later on February 3rd, 2017, when the 3DS port would do the impossible and added new alternate patterns for Roy and Corn, giving them their rightly deserved Yarn Yoshi patterns. And yes, this meant that Waluigi fans could rejoice knowing their amiibo had more use than just Mario Party Star Rush. Does anyone remember that game? Hopefully not. Moving on, these are mere cosmetic changes that don't alter the gameplay whatsoever, but it's hard to argue against something so precious and captivating that I couldn't not talk about it. Seriously, imagine if they made waves of Yarn Yoshi amiibo that took on the appearance of Nintendo characters alongside the existing big and multicolored ones. I'd make like a thief and steal a truck full of those, like that one heist for the Splatoon special editions. Well, at least we have the S.T.E.A.M Fire Emblem plushies to fill that void. I love you, female corn plush. Okay, I was heavily debating if I should have included this game and exactly where to place the game on the timeline because of conflicting release dates, which I'll soon discuss, but to avoid any comments saying that I missed this game, here we go. Style savvy, fashion forward. Wait, I mean new style boutique too, fashion forward. Wait, I mean Garusu Modo 3 Kira Kira Kode. Heck, okay, we're just gonna call this game fashion forward moving forth. Fashion Forward first released in Japan on April 16, 2015, then in Europe on November 20, 2015, and then a year later on August 19, 2016 in North America, serves as our 5th game in the Fire Emblem amiibo compatibility timeline. As the 3rd installment in the quote Style Savvy series, developed by Sin Sophia, the player is tasked in managing fashion, hairstyling, and being a makeup artist to make money and save their struggling in-game boutique. Targeted for young children, this title would have a weird history with amiibo compatibility among its 3 releases. When Fashion Forward first released in Japan, Mario, Peach, Yoshi, Kirby, Luigi, Bowser, and Toad provided a fashion item for the player to use. Personally, I absolutely love the Yoshi hoodie and Kirby purse, and I wonder if Nintendo has made either available in some format. But, as you would probably notice, nothing Fire Emblem related was available for amiibo compatibility here. Instead, Fire Emblem fans would have to seek out the European release of Fashion Forward, in which amiibo functionality was expanded upon with 10 new compatible amiibo added. By the looks of it, this update would be made possible with the release of more amiibo within the roughly 7-month gap between releases, as said 10 amiibo were predominantly of the female characters in the Super Smash Bros. Lineup, minus the Inkling Girl and Isabelle, who weren't playable characters until Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Included in this was compatibility for the Lucina amiibo, which through a Twitter post uploaded roughly a week prior to its European release showcased the Warrior skirt, a blue and gold skirt to use alongside other amiibo or non-amiibo clothing. Whether you see this as unfortunate or not, the lack of a Robin Player 2 amiibo and the yet to be released Corn Player 2, Celica, and Tiki amiibo meant that this was the only Fire Emblem representation within the game. As for the North American release a year later, everything available in the European release would be included, so it's possible to also use the Lucina amiibo to receive the aforementioned Warrior skirt. What was more notable about this release, however, was an article by Famitsu prior to the launch in North America, which would discuss about an update coming to Fashion Forward in Japan that allowed existing users to receive the additional amiibo clothing sets like Lucina's Warrior skirt through a download if the player had an internet connection. This would also be affirmed by Nintendo Japan's website for the game that also encouraged players to connect to the internet to redeem their available rewards. With no mention of amiibo even after machine translation, I cannot seem to find any mention that those who owned a Japanese copy of Fashion Forward had to use amiibo and instead could simply download all amiibo clothing sets for free. I'm not that confident saying this, but I don't recall any other title giving amiibo rewards as downloadable content. Other than that little oddity, I don't really have a personal opinion about the quality of amiibo compatibility in this game. The Fire Emblem inclusion is quite minute, though I will say the screenshots from Famitsu are a nice demonstration as to the potential of customization in the game, seeing that the model for the warrior skirt looks pretty similar to Lucina. That, and reviews by Amazon users seem pretty positive all around, but other than that, I suppose this does fall into my favoritism of accessories as an amiibo function, so good job to Sin Sophia for including a variety of amiibo clothing for those who owned amiibo and the game. So I want to start off by saying that I absolutely love this game. I heavily enjoyed Fire Emblem Fates and have put countless hours into the main game and leveling up my units for the online mode that never returned in a future Fire Emblem title. Now, Fire Emblem Fates, developed by Intelligent Systems and released in the West on February 19th, 2016, is the first mainline Fire Emblem to feature amiibo support since the teaser of Lucina back in that digital event amiibo trailer. This is also the first entry to feature routes as a core story mechanic, assuming you don't, count previous entries that had different endings depending on if certain units made it to the end of your journey. In Fates, you follow either male or female cinnamon roll on their quest to help Hoshido, nor find peace between the two kingdoms, or
join Smash!
Yes, if it wasn't already apparent, Corrin may or may not be one of my favorite Fire Emblem lords. Sorry, not sorry. As for this title's amiibo support, Marth, Ike, Lucina, and Robin once again would be made usable as their amiibo would come out prior to the Japanese release back in June 2015. This would exclude the Roy, Corrin, and Corrin Player 2 amiibo, but the latter two make sense as you'll shortly see why it'd be redundant for their inclusion. For the first mainline Fire Emblem title to use amiibo, Intelligent Systems would set an extremely high bar for any future amiibo compatible games. Through the amiibo setting in the My Castle menu, the player could summon the amiibo to visit them and talk with them. After multiple visits/summons, the player will eventually get the opportunity to face the amiibo on the plains of Hoshido to possibly unlock them as a permanent teammate for their path, assuming you're not playing on classic mode where they can die like any other unit. What was astounding from Fire Emblem Fates' implementation of amiibo was the work put into making the tagline of, quote, Toys to Life true, alongside the effort in making new 3DS character models for Marth and Ike, unlike Awakenings and Heriad units, whilst creating new Fates-inspired portraits for the amiibo. Rather than being the characters from their respective original game, these units were actually variants that came from the Super Smash Bros. Universe, who mostly recall their battles against unknown opponents as they fought and flew off stages. Subsequently, for astute Fire Emblem Awakening players, the Lucina and Robin amiibo would have unique dialogue when facing against 3 certain units available in the Conquest and Revelations routes in their respective amiibo battles. Furthermore, in these multiple visits prior to recruiting the amiibo, it was possible to receive gifts from them in the form of accessories that could be worn by any unit on your team after unlocking the accessory shop building in the My Castle. To list them off, Marth could give you the dragon headpiece, which has a resemblance to Tiki's circlet, and Marth's tiara. Ike gives Ike's pauldron and unipauldron, which resembles Laurent's medallion. Robin donates a cabinet of books called Robin's Books and the dragon feather accessory. Lastly, Lucina gifts an adorable bear hat and her iconic butterfly mask. Moreover, after recruiting and receiving these gifts from the amiibo, one could still summon them to hopefully find them working in the accessory shop to then purchase more of their accessories, or better yet, find them working in one of the armories to then buy a replica version of their signature weapon. This is possible because despite unlocking the amiibo and being able to provide them different weapons, their signature weapon was locked to the inventory, meaning that it was impossible for players to try and swap Marth's falchion for Lucina's parallel falchion. With these weakened weapons, a compromise was achieved where any of your units can wield a decent weapon that still appeared like the legendary weapons. To list off once more, Marth would sell Marth's Spatha, which resembled his falchion. Ike would sell Ike's backup, which resembled Ragnall. Robin would sell Robin's primer, which resembled Thoron. And last but not least, Lucina would sell Lucina's S-Stock, which resembled Chrom's falchion and her parallel falchion. However, I suppose I should mention that amiibo units weren't perfect in the sense that they are not perfect as Fire Emblem units. Essentially, with the locked signature weapons, amiibo units would also be unable to change classes outside of the amiibo classes and had to rely on DLC skill items if they wanted to learn additional skills outside their respective class. So, for example, if one had access to the Before Awakening DLC and has not used their Heroes brand item they received from completing the chapter, one could make their Ike or Robin unit into a Lodestar to learn Marth's class skills. The problem with this is that Lucina is the only female unit, which makes her unable to access the Lodestar, Vanguard, or Grandmaster class and only rely on said DLC skill items. Luckily, skills such as Ether and Warp can be found as items to then give to Lucina or the other amiibo units. Ultimately, these limitations, especially to Lucina, make amiibo units subpar and somewhat obsolete when compared to the other units in any of the Fates routes, as they too can use DLC skill items and are more likely to be used by players. In the end, amiibo and Fire Emblem Fates are great for the fan service they provide, whilst being average as actual units in gameplay. Nonetheless, I personally believe this is the perfect outcome when it comes to amiibo units. They provided unique dialogue with the player character and other units, accessories for the players to customize with and replica weapons to equip, new classes with special abilities, and can be used on a player's team if they truly desire. Amiibo could be used but did not break the game, nor were mandatory to fully experience the game played. To top this all off, I didn't even mention that these amiibo units had newly recorded dialogue and brought over special music for their amiibo battle. Here, take a listen to this new rendition of the Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light player phase battle theme for Marth's amiibo battle. To reiterate once more, the bar was set extremely high with Fates and set precedent as to what amiibo should look at least in a Fire Emblem game. A couple months later, with the unveiling of actual Fire Emblem series amiibo in the form of Almond Celica during the Fire Emblem Direct, it can only possibly go up, right? Well, let's find out. Another detour, because we actually have a game to look up before Echo Shadow's Valentia, and that would be the beloved and long-awaited Super Mario Maker for the Wii U. No, there is no Nintendo 3DS version that does not have amiibo support, nor an online mode, because that would be crazy, as sharing courses was an integral part to the Super Mario Maker experience. I'd say the title is a pretty good synopsis of the game, but for those unaware of the 7th best-selling Wii U title, Super Mario Maker released in North America on September 11, 2015, after its reveal also at the E3 digital event in 2014. Man, this is quite the recurring trend in how Nintendo shoved amiibo into basically every game from that event. Anywho, this new entry for the Mario franchise was a creator tool / platformer for the Wii U, where one could create their custom Mario stages in a selection of styles and / or download and play courses created by other players around the world. Personally, as someone who adores both 2D and 3D Mario games, and played Little Big Planet when they were little, a game like this was perfect for me, and many Nintendo fans who had been clamoring for a chance to be the creator of a Mario game rather than the player. Luckily, more Nintendo fans would get to experience this game when the sequel came out for the Nintendo Switch, with new features such as a story mode, a new game style, and more elements to test around with. Unfortunately, something that would haunt returning players and amiibo collectors alike was the removal of the Mystery Mushroom, an item that one could place onto their stage to transform Mario into Costume Mario and take on the 8-bit or 16-bit rendition of a character within the Super Mario Bros. Style. Now, you may be thinking, but Claes, we have that Master Sword item that transforms Mario into Link. And yes, the A Legendary update would allow players to look and play as Link from The Legend of Zelda, but it's difficult to fully appreciate the update with the removal of the other 152 unlockable costumes from the original Super Mario Maker for Wii U. There, through playing and clearing the 100 Mario Challenge mode multiple times on either of the 3 difficulties and completing online event courses, it was possible to unlock every costume the game had to offer for the Mystery Mushroom. Fortunately, for those who owned amiibo of their favorite characters, if the amiibo had a costume within the game, one could bypass the gacha mechanics of randomly unlocking through the 100 Mario challenge. What this meant for avid Fire Emblem fans is that if you own the amiibo for Marth, Ike, Lucina, and/, or Robin, it was possible to be simply awarded the 8-bit sprite costume for the respective character to then use as a mystery mushroom costume. Now, why might you be interested in this fact? Well, these sprites, including the Fire Emblem costumes, would feature aesthetics in both sound effects and a pose. For these Fire Emblem representatives, they primarily took inspiration from their more vibrant representations in Fire Emblem Fates and Super Smash Bros. For Wii U, with all sound effects being taken from the Famicom version of Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light. This included the level up sound effect when transforming with the mystery mushroom, the dying sound effect if the player falls to their death while wearing the costume, and the victory theme of seizing a castle after grabbing the flagpole. As for the unique poses, Marth takes out his falchion while stabbing it into the ground, somewhat similar to his stance in the Famicom box art for Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light. Ike too stabs Ragnall into the ground and matches his Super Smash Bros. For Wii U artwork. Lucina puts on her butterfly mask in a similar pose to her downton in the Super Smash Bros. Series. And Robin, who like Ike, poses like his artwork from Super Smash Bros. For Wii U and his later Fire Emblem Warriors artwork. Once again, I know this is kind of breaking the rule as the Fire Emblem inclusion within this title is quite small and similar to other costumes, but I always enjoyed how they're able to translate the map sprites for these characters from Fire Emblem Awakening and Fates into the NES Super Mario Bros. Style. Unfortunately, with no reason specified and the lack of the mystery mushroom item in the 3DS port of Super Mario Maker, not all of the Super Smash Bros. Amiibo would be included in the game, with 5 characters missing the cut. This meant that Ryu, Roy, Cloud, Corrin, and Bayonetta would not receive their own 8-bit rendition. This is quite confusing, seeing that other Fire Emblem characters and Mega Man were already in the game, so it's not like third-party characters are unable to make the cut, but now you're plagued with this knowledge and must live with it for the rest of your lives. First of all, did you know that the word choice of echoes for this game was used to avoid confusion for modern Fire Emblem fans, as Gaiden means side story in Japanese? Moreover, if we were to get more remakes in the future, we may see the Echoes title once again. If you want to know more about this often neglected title in the Fire Emblem series, or just general information about Fire Emblem development, I implore you to read the fan translation of the Dengeki developer interview from April 2017, seen on screen and linked in the description, and give Cantopia, the translator of said article, a follow on Twitter. I've read this interview a couple times in the past, and enjoy looking at what developers behind the scenes, like the producer Hitoshi Yamagami, have to say about the series. But to get back on track with the amiibo discussion, Fire Emblem Echoes Shadows of Valentia was the final mainline Fire Emblem title to release on the Nintendo 3DS on May 19, 2017, after its reveal in the Fire Emblem Direct held on January 18th of the same year. The first to receive full dialogue voice acting, assuming you neglect a game like BS Fire Emblem exclusive for the Satellaview add-on, or Tokyo Session Sharp FE, I'll always argue that this remake was the perfect opportunity for Intelligent Systems to conceive ideas they would later use in Fire Emblem Three Houses, whilst offering a new story for Western Fire Emblem fans to experience. This time around, alongside the game's reveal, amiibo for the two protagonists, Alm and Celica, would be unveiled with future information to come as to what their functionality would amount to. If there was anything notable from these amiibo based on just looks alone, were the red bases, confirming that a new lineup of amiibo specifically for the Fire Emblem series was to be produced. Eventually, through a webpage posted by Nintendo Japan around March 2017, and a video later uploaded on the 28th in the same month, amiibo functionality for the title would be revealed for both the Alm and Celica amiibo, existing Fire Emblem amiibo, and amiibo outside the two. With emphasis placed onto the new Fire Emblem series amiibo, the Alm and Celica amiibo would provide the most bang for one's buck, as it could be used inside and outside of battle. To first discuss the more interesting use of amiibo outside of battle, using the Alm or Celica amiibo would unlock an exclusive dungeon for the player's party to explore and acquire powerful and worthwhile items and accessories. By defeating waves of enemies of increasing difficulty and ultimately completing Duma's ordeals or Milla's ordeals, items such as Duma's shield and Milla's diadem were provided to the player to assist them on their journey. It's quite enjoyable how the game doesn't allow you to get all the items easily due to said increasingly more difficult waves, thus preventing the player from having an easy start and providing an incentive for the player to continue playing to get the most out of their Alm and / or Celica amiibo. As for the other aspect of amiibo, or for what amiibo could do within battle, although the roster would grow from just Marth, Ike, Lucina, and Robin to finally include Roy, Corrin, and Corrin Player 2, unfortunately this would not be a similar experience to that of Fire Emblem Fates. In case you forgot, those amiibo units were recruitable, permanent, and customizable to a certain degree after multiple visits. This time around, however, as an option once unlocked in Milla's turn wheel quite early in the game, players could summon an illusory ally to help them fight in battle at the cost of 10 HP and the protagonist's turn. To break that down, to summon an illusory unit, Alm or Celica would need to lose health and lose their turn to then summon a unit that the player could not control, as it would instead act on its own during the ally phase and then vanish until summoned again for another 10 HP and turn. Yeah, compared to Fates, this reworking made amiibo somewhat useless in battle if they weren't the Alm or Celica amiibo. Why, you may ask? Well, illusory units of Alm or Celica would replicate the respective protagonist's stats, which may help either party with a powerful ally if desperately needed. I don't think I need to mention that non-Fire Emblem amiibo simply summoned a random illusory unit like a Pegasus Knight or an Assassin. Because reasons? So, as cool as the new Roy 3DS model may look under the ghostly filter, amiibo were generally weaker than most party members on the player's team, and you couldn't even control them. At least we were able to get a new rendition of Attack from Fire Emblem Fui no Tsurugi or Fire Emblem the Binding Blade. Here, take a listen to this short comparison. On the whole, as great as exclusive dungeons that provide items and accessories are, I'd argue that the amiibo functions for this mainline title is worse than the previous. Although I understand that the quote integrity and immersiveness of the game may be ruined when someone like Prince Marth is randomly in the continent of Valentia and not in the neighboring continent of Arcanea acting like it's king, or Lucina and Robin are now in the continent that will become Valm, I'd like to remind that the Fates amiibo units were versions from the Super Smash Bros. Universe and lack support conversations with Fates units, so really, does that argument hold up in the world of video games? I suppose that's for you to decide, but I think most fans would have enjoyed having the option to recruit the amiibo based on figurines they've purchased in the past. To end on a lighter note, if you know how to modify your 3DS and own the game, there is a mod out there on Game Banana called Amiibos Plus Plus DX that allows the player to recruit the Fire Emblem amiibos whilst being able to view them in all their 3D model gloriness. Shout out to the uploader of the mod, Ersted. I'll put a link in the description if you'd like to tinker with that. Again, this wasn't the worst idea from Intelligent Systems, and it certainly was better than nothing, but it would have been nice to at least control the summoned illusory unit since health points and the protagonist's turn needed to be sacrificed. As the next spin-off title and disappointment for Fire Emblem fans, minus me because I love this game in Tokyo Mirage Session Sharp FE, Fire Emblem Warriors was the next collaborative title from Intelligent Systems, Omega Force, and Team Ninja following the success of Hyrule Warriors on the Wii U. First revealed in the Nintendo Switch presentation 2017 as the first Fire Emblem related title for the yet to be released console, this crossover sought to bring the worlds of Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, Awakening, and Fates together in a hack and slash game with a new story focusing on the Kingdom of Aetolis, another dimension within the Fire Emblem universe. Ignoring that one of the best characters, Liana, was made for this game and I patiently wait for her next appearance outside of Fire Emblem Cypher, players could play as Marth, the Hero King, to Lindis, noblewoman of the Sakai Plains, as they experience the story mode and history mode and strategically button mash towards victory. Fortunately, released in the same year as the Alm and Celica amiibo, the Fire Emblem series of amiibo would see the inclusion of the Chrom and Tiki amiibo that offered exclusive content for the Nintendo Switch and 3DS versions of Warriors. First shown off at E3 of that year in a gameplay demonstration at the Nintendo Switch floor, whilst also seemingly confirming Tiki's inclusion as a playable character, these amiibo offered excellent personal E-rank weapons that provided better equipment for the player to use until they further progressed in the game. If any of that sounded familiar, well, I can't blame you, as this amiibo functionality is similar to the previous Warriors entry, in which using the Legend of Zelda series amiibo unlocked exclusive weapons in Hyrule Warriors. To elaborate more on these Fire Emblem amiibo, after scanning the Chrom amiibo for the first time, the player would be awarded Chrom's training sword that heavily resembled his falchion, but with a silver finish rather than gold in both the guard and pommel of the sword. With a might of 125, assuming the player is on the 1.3 update, and limitations placed onto the weapon for reforging, Chrom's training sword is a useful and worthwhile weapon until the player unlocks the true power of Chrom's falchion with his mastery crest later in the game. Similarly, in unlocking a character-specific item, Tiki grants the player an exclusive dragon stone called Tiki's Tear. Once a stat-boosting item in Fire Emblem Awakening, this crystallized tear is arguably more rewarding than Chrom's training sword, as it also boosts Tiki's health and other stats greatly, making her an even more powerful unit. Should a player unlock the Divine Stone item through DLC and use Tiki's Mastery Crest though, then this item becomes somewhat obsolete despite the additional benefits. Besides these weapons, amiibo outside of Chrom and Tiki could provide the player with gold, materials, or weapons up to 5 times a day. So, if you were to tap an amiibo like Mario into the game, depending on story and level progression, it is possible to unlock decent weapons or much needed items to help with blacksmithing services. However, in the same vein as The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, if you were to use a Fire Emblem series amiibo from Marth to Celica, the type of weapon drop could be influenced. That said, as you would probably notice, all Fire Emblem amiibo use swords, so tapping a Fire Emblem amiibo meant predominantly obtaining powerful swords, which doesn't really help if you like using characters such as Frederick or Sheeta. Though the Robin amiibo would provide tomes despite having the Levin sword, so at least there's some variety for them, Lind and Tharja I suppose. All in all, and quite expectedly for a Warrior spin-off title, the amiibo functionality was not as expansive as the mainline titles. Personally, I give it this excuse seeing that most of the amiibo were already unlockable characters within the game, so it'd be a little redundant for the Marth amiibo to unlock Marth, or Celica to unlock Celica as playable units similar to Fates. Sure, it'd be nice if the user in the respective amiibo could have unlocked the character sooner in-game, but seeing that the story mode isn't devastatingly long, and the unlock requirements aren't too difficult to fulfill even for beginner players, it's quite understandable. I do think though that using the Ike, Roy, and Alm amiibo should have done something more unique, like unlocking the legendary weapon for Rowan or Liana to use, but once again, the fact that there was an attempt to include some amiibo support for a Warriors spin-off title whilst not making it too expendable is commendable in my opinion. Obviously, the best case scenario for amiibo support would have been making Ike, Roy, and Alm playable if their amiibo was used, but on-disc DLC or locked content most likely would have caused quite the backlash. Here we are at full circle. The Super Smash Bros. Series would see its next entry on the Nintendo Switch as it was released worldwide on December 7, 2018, only minutes after the unveiling of its first DLC character at the Game Awards, Joker from Persona 5. Side note, if you haven't purchased Persona 5 The Royal or any of the other remastered titles on Nintendo Switch, I would highly suggest you do so. In this All-Stars Battle Royale featuring Dante from the Devil May Cry series, if one includes the DLC, there are a whopping 89 characters playable overall from both first-party and third-party series that Super Smash Bros. Fans are sure to enjoy. With its critical acclaim and becoming the best-selling fighting game of all time, one may wonder what new additions and returning features for Amiibo were included after Super Smash Bros. For Wii U and 3DS's compatibility. Well, without question, the previous promise of Amiibo for each playable fighter remains true, as at the time this video's release, the latest Amiibo were Sephiroth and Kazuya, both being third-party representatives of some of the most beloved series of all time, with the Pyramithra Dual Pack being the last to release until the long-awaited Sora Amiibo is finally announced. Because of this, Amiibo for the newest Fire Emblem representatives, Chrom and Byleth, were also released, establishing Chrom as part of the family of Amiibo who have more than one variant. Released on November 15, 2019 in North America and March 26, 2021 worldwide respectively, one could use their new Fire Emblem Amiibo to once again train and battle in offline modes to their heart's content. Also, like most amiibo variants, if one owned the Fire Emblem series Chrom amiibo, it was possible to train the amiibo in Super Smash Bros. Prior to the release of the Super Smash Bros. Series variant. Should anyone be wondering the lack of a female Byleth amiibo, Masahiro Sakurai would confirm in the Mr. Sakurai Presents Alex and Steve on October 3rd, 2020 that they quote were only able to create the Player 1 Fighter amiibo after acknowledging the lack of said Player 2 amiibo. And with no Robin Player 2 amiibo being created either, despite returning fighters such as Pokemon Trainer or Ice Climber receiving them, and the aforementioned Alex amiibo, Fire Emblem fans would need to accept not having a complete lineup of Fire Emblem amiibo because of unknown reasons. Besides this, amiibo would find some form of expansion other than just the usual training and amiibo battles. Firstly, unlike the Wii U and 3DS versions, amiibo could inherit spirits, this title's trophy replacement, to gain experience and learn skills to make them even more broken. Moreover, no longer limited by the restraints that are offline, through an internet connection, it is possible to send one's amiibo on a journey as another way to gain experience at the cost of not being able to play the game you purchased. And just wait, with the 3.1.0 update on May 30th, 2019, players could use their amiibo in the online arena mode to play with the amiibo battle rule set where one could face or team up with amiibo from around the world. So it's just playing with them online rather than offline, which is not that big of a change, but like it's yeah. Lastly, amiibo that were not compatible as a playable fighter in this game could provide the player with a variety of rewards from corresponding spirits, gold, or spirit points. Since this is a video about Fire Emblem amiibo, and you probably know that a majority of the Fire Emblem related amiibo already are fighters, the remaining amiibo were of the Fire Emblem series and included Alm, Celica, and Tiki. Luckily, spirits for these characters were available to unlock in the game. To unlock the Alm and Celica young spirit, the player could tap the Alm or Celica amiibo they owned. To unlock the Tiki spirit, the player could tap the Tiki amiibo they owned. On the whole, with the exclusion of extra game modes like Smash Run, the ideas for what amiibo could do in this title were more difficult to conjure than what was already mentioned. That said, I am happy that at least for amiibo functionality, they simply added more rather than take, because if it isn't broken, why fix it? And again, most people buy Super Smash Bros. Amiibo for the novelty and collectability rather than training the figurine for offline and online battles. In the end, I'm just happy Chrom got his chance once more, Byleth proved to be another unique and overall beloved fighter, and Fire Emblem fans could collect more Fire Emblem amiibo. Finally, after all those discussions, we are at the first mainline title release for the Nintendo Switch, Fire Emblem Three Houses. As the last item mentioned within the Fire Emblem Direct back in 2017, this game was the first mainline entry in the series to release worldwide on July 26, 2019, and a return to console since the release of Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn for the Wii back in 2007. Unlike previous Fire Emblem games, Three Houses sought to break the limitations of the modern Fire Emblem mold by featuring fully voiced dialogue, a 3D environment to explore in the form of the monastery, a return to classic Fire Emblem games with the removal of the triangle system, new approaches to class changes, and so much more. From one playthrough alone, either as a professor for the Black Eagles, Blue Lions, or Golden Deer, it was apparent to fans that Intelligent Systems, alongside Koei Tecmo, were just as motivated with the development for Fire Emblem Three Houses as they previously were when Fire Emblem Awakening was slated to be the last Fire Emblem title. Furthermore, similar to its 3DS predecessors, Fire Emblem Three Houses would feature DLC that included a variety of additional content and a new story to experience in the route they chose. As for its amiibo compatibility, the praise somewhat ends, as Fire Emblem Three Houses exemplifies the trajectory that unfortunately kept going lower after Fire Emblem Echo Shadows of Valentia, with even less emphasis placed onto its uniqueness. From the get-go, amiibo for Byleth or the class representatives, Edelgard, Dimitri, and Claude, would not be made, which meant that no new amiibo for the Fire Emblem series would release alongside Fire Emblem Three Houses. Instead, the plan this time around was to embrace the previously made Super Smash Bros. And Fire Emblem lineups of amiibo with the cleverly named Amiibo Gazebo. Here in this small location within the monastery, depending on whether the player is on a normal save file or one of New Game Plus, it is possible to scan these Fire Emblem related amiibo to summon useful items for fishing, gardening, and general stat boosting items while obtaining a special gift: music. Okay, I know I have previously praised the addition of music in Fire Emblem Fates and Fire Emblem Echo Shadows of Valentia because of the new renditions of old tracks, but this time around, music unlocked from amiibo were kinda brought over from the amiibo's respective game and could only be used in auxiliary battles rather than main missions or paralogs. In case you'd like to know which songs are unlockable, the Marth amiibo unlocks Time to Act from the Nintendo DS remake Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon. The Ike amiibo unlocks Eternal Bond from Fire Emblem Path of Radiance. The Lucina amiibo unlocks Conquest Ablaze from Fire Emblem Awakening. The Robin amiibo unlocks Id Purpose from Fire Emblem Awakening. The Roy amiibo unlocks Beneath a New Light, Roy's Courage from Fire Emblem Heroes. The Corn amiibo unlocks Alight's Storm from Fire Emblem Fates. The Corn Player 2 amiibo unlocks A Dark Fall, Fire, from Fire Emblem Fates. The Alm amiibo unlocks March to Deliverance from Fire Emblem Echoes, Shadows of Valentia. The Celica amiibo unlocks With Milla's Divine Protection from Fire Emblem Echo Shadows of Valentia. The Chrom amiibo, regardless of which series, unlocks Destiny Ablaze from Fire Emblem Awakening. And the Tiki amiibo unlocks the World Tree from Fire Emblem Warriors, which is my personal favorite to use. Now, listing these off were somewhat important if you notice the amount of times I said additional words like ablaze or storm to list off a few. Why? Well, since the start of the Fire Emblem series, there has always been a distinct overworld theme and battle theme that the player will hear when playing. For convenience sake, assuming your first mainline title is Fire Emblem Three Houses, let's use it as an example with the song Fodlan Winds. Currently, you are listening to Fodlan Wind's Reign, the overworld theme that plays as your units and the enemy wait for you to take command. Well, let's target an enemy and engage in battle.
Each battle a chance to grow.
Did you catch that? The more intense sounding version that played as your unit fought the enemy? That was Fodlan Wind's Thunder, the battle theme that effortlessly is transitioned into when in combat. It's a subtle yet immersive way to mix up the music, and this applies to all battles within the game. Take a closer listen if you've missed it in your next playthrough. Now, what I just discussed was the norm since Fire Emblem Awakening, where one track was used for a map and had both a calm and intense version that would be transitioned into depending on the player's movements. Unfortunately, this formula does not apply to the unlockable amiibo music, and instead, if you were to use a song like Conquest Ablaze, you only hear the intense battle version throughout. Although I do not fully understand game development and cannot make the same argument for songs like Time to Act from the Marth amiibo, as there is a unique player phase battle theme and enemy phase battle theme in Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon, I do wonder if it was impossible to at least include it for songs like Conquest Ablaze. Just as a fun demonstration, this is an example of what I would have wished for instead.
could use some polish.
In any case, Fire Emblem Three Houses, in my opinion, misses the target on what made amiibo compatibility worthwhile in previous Fire Emblem games. I'm not sure if I'm in the wrong for blaming either Intelligent Systems or Koei Tecmo for not making 11 amiibo units, whilst programming a Maniket class exclusively for Tiki, all in the style of Fire Emblem Three Houses, but there's still a part of me that wishes something like that was possible. I cannot suggest the illusory units either, because obviously that would still include making models in the same way, but putting a ghostly filter of sorts over. Nevertheless, at this point, extra incentives like accessories could have been an idea to try, if I may explain. You could get the Fire Emblem, or rather the Emblem Shield, in the accessory shop in Fire Emblem Fates if you had Street Pass data for Fire Emblem Awakening on your 3DS. Well, you know how you could equip shields onto your characters in Fire Emblem Three Houses and they boost stats and are viewable on your unit? I think you can connect the dots as to what kind of extra content could have been added with something like the Chrom or Lucina amiibo. Coming out of left field, and as the second last title we'll be looking at on our timeline of amiibo compatible games for Fire Emblem, Nintendo came out swinging in the February 2022 Nintendo Direct and revealed that the next collaborative Warriors spin-off would take place within the Fire Emblem Three Houses dimension. Thankfully, through an interview published by Nintendo Dream and then translated by Nintendo Everything, fans would learn that this title initially was conceived as Fire Emblem Warriors 2, with no clear direction as to whether this would be another crossover game like the previous Warriors entry or a new attempt with the Warriors formula. In the end, the Koei Tecmo development staff would opt to focus on the world of Fodlan, expand its cast of characters, and explain the unturned stones of the mainline game, whilst put an emphasis on the new antagonist, the Ashen Demon. Similar to Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity and Persona 5 Scramble the Phantom Strikers, Fire Emblem Three Hopes impressively takes on the exact same style as its mainline counterpart with the Warriors' flair rather than traditional tactical RPG elements. I am aware that it's the same team working on the same title and it uses the exact same engine, but I find it impressive regardless, okay? Now, for this title, what I can assume were three obvious ways to approach amiibo functionality, the first two being rather less impressive as they'd be carbon copies at this point. The first approach could be to use the same amiibo functionalities as previous Nintendo Warriors related titles by unlocking exclusive weapon content and general items. The second approach could be to follow the mainline counterpart in offering the same or different music tracks to use within side quests. Or, the third approach is to combine the two in some format of exclusive weapon drops, general items, and special music tracks. Unfortunately, the first option was selected and somehow made worse. This time around, with the previous missed opportunity of an Edelgard, Dimitri, or Claude amiibo, this meant a lack of characters in-game were represented by amiibo. And because of that, there was no way to give exclusive weapons. Instead, regardless of the amiibo, you can get general item drops, but with the added benefit that Fire Emblem related amiibo have a slightly greater chance to give better items. So in the grand scheme of things, this meant that Fire Emblem amiibo would act basically the same as non-Fire Emblem amiibo would in the original Fire Emblem Warriors game. However, I'm not sure if this is actually verifiable, like if there is someone who has data mined the game and has found the actual numbers or parameters that suggest this. I say this because although I am under this belief, after a couple tests with regular amiibo on later chapters in my Golden Wildfire playthrough, Fire Emblem amiibo have provided me worse drops than non-Fire Emblem amiibo and vice versa. The greater chance feels like it's there, but I'm uncertain by how better the RNG is when compared. But wait, before we end things, you may have noticed that I contradicted myself in saying that none of the Fire Emblem amiibo were represented in the game, because there is in fact one, the Ashen Demon. With the inclusion of Bowth in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate and his amiibo released prior to the release of Fire Emblem Three Hopes, let's see what the Bowth amiibo does for this game. Yeah, It does nothing special, which seems like a huge missed opportunity since this game was another chance to explore Foldland and gave an easy excuse to have special Bath amiibo functionality. Now, what fix/idea could I possibly have conjured for this? Well, remember how Crom's training sword was a similar replica to his falchion? Do you also remember that lost item called Thunderbrand replica that you could return to Caspar in Fire Emblem 3 Houses? Lastly, do you recall how this game runs on the same engine as Fire Emblem 3 Houses and other relic weapons are already in this game? Connect the dots once more, and I think it would have been a worthwhile endeavor to make a sort of the creator replica for any unit, like Shez, to use within the game. To conclude, I know that I gave an excuse to the original Fire Emblem Warriors, as it too did the bare minimum, but even if amiibo units cannot be added, there are still ideas I think that could have been implemented to avoid making amiibo worthless in Nintendo games. Though, supposedly in that same Nintendo Dream interview, there were thoughts about possibly reintroducing characters from past titles, but it was eventually dropped to solely focus on just the dimension of Foldland. So, is it too far-fetched to say amiibo units weren't conceived for this game at one point? Unfortunately, unlike the previous Warriors entries available on Nintendo Switch, 3 Hopes will most likely receive no future DLC with the release of Fire Emblem Engage. Luckily, the end product is still a nice wrap-up to the Foldland saga for the time being. And just when you thought Mirage Masters were a thing of the past, Token Mirage Sessions 2, Fire Emblem Engage, emerges in the shadow as the true calling card in celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Fire Emblem series as a whole. I may have only been a fan for a third of the series' run, but has it been a blast experiencing what Nintendo and Intelligent Systems has had to offer from countless main lines and spin-offs, a yet-to-return anime, exhibits and concerts, and many more projects that truly express the uniqueness of a growing series. Admittingly, I shouldn't be too surprised to see Corrin again on the Nintendo Switch after their inclusion in both Fire Emblem Warriors and Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, but I'll thank Naga each day that she and Rex have profile icons after so long. Okay, but before I get ahead of myself, it's best to backpedal. Despite its unfortunate luck of being leaked back in June 2022 through a Reddit post prior to its reveal later in the September 13, 2022 Nintendo Direct, and supposedly being held in the Nintendo Vault for an unspecified amount of time, Engage is the most recent mainline release within the Fire Emblem series and our last video game to discuss in terms of amiibo functionality. Similar to how 3 Houses improved on aspects found within Shadows of Valentia, Engage strikes a phenomenal balance between reintroducing much needed mechanics such as the triangle system, maintaining the open area exploration through the Somnial with a plethora of tasks to perform upon revisiting, but more in the vein of 3 Hopes' base camp, invented new techniques like Break that I felt like a staple combat mechanic in the series, whilst implementing features from other Nintendo games like a gacha system for emblem rings a la Xenoblade Chronicles 2 Blade Resonance or Splatoon 3's Shellout Machine. In other words, if you're looking for a game to start the series off with, I'd 100% recommend Fire Emblem Engage for its excellent depth in gameplay and bringing back past lores for veteran and new players to gawk at. And this is just the tip of the iceberg when you think about the love and attention put into the representation of said lords, as they have unique dialogue with units in-game after achieving certain bond levels and the emblem paralogs that replicate core moments in past Fire Emblem titles. But as we've learned since Fire Emblem Fates, the praise eventually must end when the discussion shifts to the topic of this video, amiibo functionality. I'll admit, the future isn't grim because I'd say that the amiibo offerings in Fire Emblem Engage isn't a step down from 3 Houses because it does something unique: clothing. First Mirage Masters and now Style Savvy comes back into the play. No longer restricted to the warrior skirt from Style Savvy, the player can now customize certain units in-game to wear Lucina's outfit without needing to consume an Exalt's brand item from Fates. How this is possible is due to the returning Amiibo Gazebo, that provides the player a fashion ticket and music ticket upon scanning any and all of the currently available Fire Emblem Amiibo. As long as the player has completed the corresponding chapter and acquired the emblem ring of their favorite lord, it is possible to change the appearance of the unit within the Somnial. Oh, and if you're wondering how to unlock these without spending ridiculous amounts of money in the real world, it is possible to unlock these amiibo outfits if you reach bond level 20 for the emblem with all units excluding DLC. Should you take on such a task, I commend you and offer an imaginary honey caramel banana chocolate donut. Now for what should be a step up is arguably brought down by an amiibo reward that was offered back in 3 houses: changeable music for side battles. Once again being called skirmish since Fire Emblem Fates, it is possible to swap out the battle music into something more engaging, pun intended. Upon revisiting previous chapters, should the player feel the need to grind EXP for their units, gain some rewards, or refresh the Somnial to do some more arena training. Whatever the case may be, the previously mentioned music ticket received from scanning a Fire Emblem amiibo provides the ability to purchase a corresponding song track from the emblem already unlocked. Sure, this is a wonderful addition for lores that do not have amiibo currently like Sigurd or Leaf, as music from Fire Emblem Genealogy the Holy War and Thracia 776 are not excluded unlike 3 houses. However, there is a catch. These music tracks are not remixes like Path of the Hero King from Fire Emblem Fates, or even the special remixes done for the Emblem Paralogs and Engage. Instead, these songs are simply ripped from the amiibo's game and kept to their purest form. So instead of hearing Trouble from the Nintendo DS remake of Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon, War of Shadow from Fire Emblem Warriors, or even just the new composition of Trouble used for the Trial of Emblems in-game, you instead unlock the version made for Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light for the Famicom. With this, the amiibo music becomes a hierarchy of sorts because the later the game was created, the better quality sounding and more natural resonate when playing Engage. Though, something that is also strange is that there isn't a uniform approach to said music, because some are understandably early game battle music such as with Milla's Divine Protection or Wind Across the Plains. But then you have late to final battle music such as End of the Holy War or End of All Below. Generally speaking, it's just a questionable selection. A good selection because you can't argue against more Fire Emblem music, but questionable regardless. But in spite of what I've said, my opinion is a subjective one at the end of the day. In some sense, I can understand wanting to hear the original music from the Emblem's game. This is a celebration of the Fire Emblem series after all, and it's not my place to speak for more experienced Fire Emblem players who grew up listening to these songs and are nostalgic to hear them in any capacity, even if it's not a remake of the title. As someone who spent 462 hours with Fire Emblem Fates, I wish Intelligent Systems would have finally brought back Road Taken as Corrin's amiibo music, but alas, I must settle for something a little too riveting for skirmishes. Nothing's perfect, and I can take solace in that when it comes to amiibo functionality, because at least Nintendo is still experimenting with the possibility rather than outright dropping a still cherished part of their history. And needless to say, I cannot fault Nintendo nor Intelligent Systems for not putting amiibo units in Engage because they technically did this time around, and there was a substantial amount of work put into them as mentioned near the start of this segment. So, even if you can chop up the offerings to a simple model swap and lazy music rips, I'd still look at the brighter side and happily say that Fire Emblem Engage can sit proudly among other celebration titles as it carves a path for another 30 years. Well, after all that time, I hope you enjoyed today's extensive retrospect at most of the history of Nintendo games that offer unique Fire Emblem amiibo support. Although it hurts to say that the quality has dropped and stagnated over time, seeing that amiibo are no longer a priority for Nintendo as the whole Toys to Life shtick has fizzled out, I am happy to say that the dream of amiibo implementation is not dead yet. In what has almost been a decade since the release of the first wave of amiibo for Super Smash Bros. As of the time of this video is recording, there's still a smile on my face that these little figurines continue to see new releases every so often. Because of these little figurines, I'm overjoyed that there are so many Fire Emblem amiibo to collect, and I am fortunate to own them all. Despite the fact that there is no Lear amiibo, or for any of the other previous Fire Emblem lords, it's so great to see that the Marth amiibo and the Corrin Player 2 amiibo had their own re-releases to celebrate Fire Emblem Engage as another anniversary present for the Fire Emblem series. Obviously, it goes without saying that regardless of my opinion in this critical retrospect, I still highly recommend trying the Fire Emblem series if you haven't already. Amiibo function or not, they're still breathtaking experiences, some of the best games I've ever played in my life. Lastly, in case you're wondering, I don't think I'd do a video like this, or at least this long, for another series such as the Super Mario series or the Legend of Zelda series. Personally, I don't believe they're as expansive in the titles that contain support, nor do I believe they're as interesting to talk about in comparison to the Fire Emblem series and what that has attempted with. But that could be my bias talking, so I do want to apologize on that front. However, they also say to never say never, so perhaps I'll change my mind in the future if you guys really want to see that. But to close this video off, and if you've stayed here for this long, I want to say I'm truly grateful for the time you've given me, and I hope you consider liking the video and or subscribing. This video has been a passion project for me for so long, as I've tried to balance academic life and other personal matters, so I'm glad it's finally done. It's been a long ride for myself, and I hope you guys can stick around as I continue to make videos in this journey of content creation. And if you want to see more of me, I stream on this channel on a scheduled basis. If you're willing to check it out, I'd love to see you in a future stream. Finally, if you have any constructive criticism to offer, by all means please do so in the comments. But try to remain somewhat civil and try to avoid posting any spoilers about more recent games in the series like Fire Emblem 3 Hopes and Engage. Now, if you don't mind me and Cornplush have to go to a certain video game company to ask them about remastering a certain game that has a third of it unplayable due to the recent eShop closures.